So we welcome you to this first one. Other topics that we're going to tackle are teenage depression, social media, and I work with a group of people that have been putting this together. So Tina Wachter is one, and Ruth Ann Sutherland is another one. Our topic today is on trauma and its impact in children. And I'm going to turn it over to Annika, who will introduce our presenter for today. So thank you for coming, and please keep an eye out through the epistle with dates for our next presentations and topics.
Hi guys. All right, Amy G. Nash has been a trauma therapist since 2014 and brings years of training and experience to her work. As a certified EMDR therapist and trauma specialist, she helps individuals struggling with depression, fears, numbing panic attacks, and feeling overwhelmed at times with shame, hopelessness, and loss of interest in life. She resides in Bel Air with her husband and her dog, Jasper.
Thank you, and good morning. I'm glad to see you all here. I hope that what we talk about is helpful and understanding. Half of trauma work is understanding what it is. It's banded around a lot these days, and I think there's a lot of confusion about what does it mean that I have a trauma. I like to refer to it as a woundedness from your past. So, as Deb said, I will be doing children in trauma, but to start with children in trauma, we first need to understand we're the biggest, as a parent or as a caregiver, we're the biggest person and the most influential in a child's life. So how we act is what's going to affect that child the most, regardless of what happens outside that child's life. So we're going to focus right now on you. So, to begin with, many people don't even realize they have trauma. I have people come to me for anxiety, depression, panic attacks, and we start doing a history, and then I realize they have trauma, and they're shocked, and many times they won't even believe it. Like, no, nothing ever happened to me. I had good parents. Yeah, this happened or that happened, but it hasn't affected me. So to start with, I'd like you to close your eyes, and I'm going to read a list of things. And I just want you to think about what I'm saying and see if in any way you have experienced this, all right? I tend to see the faults and failings of others. This happens when we're hurting, and it's too hard to think about our hurt. It's too deep. And so, without realizing it, we tend to think about all that's wrong around us. I worry about what others think of me. This is because when we've been traumatized or wounded, oftentimes we weren't good enough, or we interpreted it as we're not good enough. And so when others think badly of me, it reaffirms that belief there's something wrong with me. I feel failure. If you feel to fail, you won't take risks. If you don't take risks, there is no growth, not emotional growth. I feel like I can't get a break from troubles and stress. When we've been wounded, our tolerance is low because we hurt so much already. And so life can seem like we never get a break. It isn't that life is that bad, it's that we're so hurt. We want everything to go right, and that doesn't happen. I get angry easily. Well, when you think about it, our stress is high, our tolerance is low. It doesn't take much for us to react. I believe others are not safe. If we've been hurt through relationships, be it our parents, a spouse, an organization, we're going to be wary of other people. If we don't believe others are safe, we won't make meaningful relationships, and that will make us isolate. Isolation is not healthy. I need to control everything I can. First of all, we can't. And that's what causes us to get so anxious. We're trying to control things so they won't hurt us. If we're in control, we can stay safe, but we can't. That's the fallacy. And so the desire and the habit of trying to control everything only makes things worse for us. I've had clients who, when they get this ideal, I can only control the things in my power, their anxiety comes down, and I never see them again. That's how powerful it is to realize there's only so much I can control. I'm easily hurt by others' remarks. Woundedness keeps us sensitive. If you had burned your arm and someone came to you and laid a hand on your arm as a sign of support, most likely you would scream out in pain if you were burned. That's what happens to us in trauma. There's a certain amount of woundedness in our souls, and we're very sensitive to criticism, to feeling that maybe we're not acceptable, to all kinds of things. Okay, you can open your eyes. I'm not going to ask anyone to reveal, but I want you to know if you find any of these things to be true, it doesn't mean you have trauma. But I can tell you for sure, if you have trauma, a lot of these will be true for you. So what is trauma? Trauma, according to Bessel van der Kolk, who is a premier researcher and has been doing this for 30 years, says that trauma is a physiological effect on your brain. It's not something bad that happened and just get over it, let it go, leave it behind, stop hanging on to your past. That's not trauma. That might be a bad incident. How many of you have had something happen in your past that you laugh about it now? Oh, remember the time I fell off my bike and broke my bones, and wow, I loved my crutches, but that wasn't fun. They don't get overwhelmed by it. But if you've had trauma, what happens is all signals that come to our brain first come to the primitive part of our brain. That's the brain stem. Then it goes to the limbic system, where we have the amygdala. The amygdala is like the guard that says, you don't go by here till you're checked out. It's where our fight or flight response is. When the amygdala gets elevated, cortisol courses through our veins, because that's how we either run or we fight. And then, a split second later, it crosses over into the cognitive part of our brain, which is the prefrontal cortex. That processes what happened. It gives the amygdala the signal, all's clear, it comes down to normal, and we continue living our lives. Now, this happens thousands of times in a day. We don't even think about it. What makes trauma so unique is that trauma doesn't finish that journey. Trauma gets trapped in your limbic system. So the amygdala is still on high alert. You still have cortisol coursing through your body, and you have all those emotions stuck with that memory. And that's why sometimes something happens, and you don't know what's happening to you, but you get overwhelmed. You feel like running or fighting or whatever. It's because that's been activated. When that memory gets activated by a word, a smell, an event, even a piece of music, it can stir up all those emotions, and you're not even in the present anymore. You've gone back and you're reliving that past event without realizing it. Bessel van der Kolk calls trauma a time warp because it does that repeatedly, only you don't know what's happening. You just don't know. And people around you might say, why are you so upset? They didn't mean anything by that, but you can't explain it because you don't know what's going on. So that's part of trauma therapy, is learning these things. So realize trauma isn't just something bad that happened to you. What makes it different from something bad that happened to you is the way the brain is affected. These are scans. These are actual scans of a person's brain. The one on the left, somebody who didn't have trauma. That's what the brain should look like. The one on the right is someone who had trauma. I've had a client go to get her brain scan and saw, they said, you have PTSD. So it's a physical thing. That's the difference. So now that we know it affects the brain, let's talk about some of those effects, physical effects. So it enlarges our amygdala, which means our fight and flight center is on high alert all the time. So people with trauma tend to see danger where there is no danger, an insult where no one meant insult, or a put down when it wasn't meant. Conversely, they tend not to see real danger when there is real danger. Not all the time, but sometimes. I'm sure you know people who would say, I missed all the red flags with this situation or this relationship. Why? They probably have some kind of trauma going on there. It also shrinks the hippocampus. So that's the part that makes the decisions. So people with trauma often have trouble making decisions. They feel stuck. They lose memories. That's very common. Or they have difficulty concentrating. And because of these things, trauma tends to give us a persistent negative belief about ourselves. I do EMDR therapy. In EMDR, we have a huge list. We call them negative cognitions. All they are is belief systems that we tend to adopt from our traumatic event, be it childhood trauma or relational trauma or any other kind of trauma. And then we live with that belief system, which hampers us. If I believe that I'm not good enough, I'll always be trying to be better, not because I can be, but because I want to be acceptable. But nothing I ever do will make me feel good enough because of that belief. And anything that happens that doesn't affirm me, or even if it does, we can't accept it because we're not good enough. There's also unrealized potential because of that negative belief. You need self-confidence to become the person you're meant to be. If you don't have self-confidence, you're not going to risk. You're not going to believe in yourself to take a chance. You're not even going to dream. And then with trauma comes a certain type of helplessness. You can be a CEO of a very promising and productive organization and still be a helpless person when it comes to emotional needs. Not know how to speak up. Not know how to have your tools so that when you get overwhelmed, you know what to do and you don't just slide into a depression and then use some kind of harmful way to cope. Trauma also causes a lot of symptoms people don't think of as being related to trauma. Fear, anxiety, depression, feeling overwhelmed, having panic attacks, and having trouble sleeping. So be aware that these are some of the things you would struggle with if you had any trauma in your life. That's not all the bad news. There's some more. And please, if anyone has any questions while I'm speaking, just raise your hand, okay? Yes. Eye movement desensitization reprocessing. It's what you do when you sleep. Your eyes move back and forth, REM sleep. It's also how it's been around for 30 years. Francine Shapiro was the one that developed EMDR. It's used a lot with trauma. Trauma has to have a physiological therapy. This is what the experts have now known, that talk therapy will not take care of trauma because it's a physiological effect on your brain. You need something physical. EMDR is not the only modality. There's somatic training. There's trauma-informed yoga. There's all kinds of trauma therapies. But I chose EMDR because I like it a lot. I've done EMDR myself, and it's very productive for me. Any other questions? So when we are in this state of trying to survive, we develop response systems. We call them trauma responses. This is how we survive. There's 4 categories: fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. So I think you can all read them from there, right? The flight is the person who's a workaholic, an overthinker, person who struggles with anxiety, panic, OCD. Did you know that was a trauma response, OCD? difficulty sitting still, and perfectionist. I have people come to me and say, I'm a perfectionist, and it's like a badge of honor. And I'm thinking, that's not a good thing. Oh, okay. Thank you for telling me that. There we go. So perfectionist means I can never be happy being myself. And it usually comes from people who have felt that remember, when we're children, we don't have a fully developed brain. So we're egocentric. That's age appropriate. As children, when something goes wrong in the family, we typically think, something must be wrong with me. I'm not doing something right, or this won't happen. So the perfectionist is taking that into adulthood and thinking, I've got to do better. I've got to do better. I've got to do better. The only thing is, number one, we can never be perfect. And number two, if we could, we still wouldn't accept it. We would still say, I could have done better. Can you imagine the anxiety that brings into your life? And anxiety, as you know, is bad. Then we have the flight. These are people who have angry outbursts, people who feel the need to control so that they don't get hurt, bullies, narcissists, and people with explosive behaviors. And then there's the freeze. Those are people who have difficulty making decisions, who feel stuck, who disassociate. Disassociate means I'm not fully present in the here and now. Disassociate means I watch myself do something as though I were a bystander. Disassociate means I'm not quite all here. The brain does that when we have a lot of pain because we can only handle so much. So everyone with complex trauma disassociates to some degree. Isolating and numbness. I have a lot of clients who have numbed themselves for years. They usually don't have any memory of childhood trauma. It's not a healthy way to deal with pain. And then the fawn. I like the fawn because I'm a fawner. And I've worked really, really hard on this. The people pleaser. What do you want? And I'll give it to you. Oh, you want me to be that? I'll be that. Well, you can see by that you don't have any identity. You've lost it. Or you've not been brave enough just to be who you are. No boundaries, often overwhelmed, and codependent. Now, you can have some of these in each category. You can have one of these in each category. You can have a lot in one category or two categories. It's not specific. There's no playbook for trauma. It affects everyone differently. Just be aware of that. Now the good news. We can do something about trauma. This is called the window of tolerance. We use it a lot in our practice to help a person get to a point where we can actually do the EMDR. So the yellow box, you have this in your handout if you want to look at it there too. The yellow zone is called the comfort zone. It's where we're able to self-soothe. It's where we're able to regulate our emotions. With trauma, self-regulation of emotions is very, very difficult because we're constantly getting reminded of the past, being taken back there, and we don't realize that's where we've gone. And because of that, we use our brains and we try to intellectualize something. It's not going to work. Because when the amygdala has gotten stirred, when the emotions are raging in your limbic system, the prefrontal cortex, the cognitive part of your brain, unplugs. They've done studies that have seen this. So what makes us go out of our window of tolerance? It's anything that would be triggering for us. It could be words, it could be actions, it could be feeling like we're back in that mode of being disrespected or unseen or not safe. And when we go out of the window of tolerance, we either do one of two things. We become hypo-aroused. That's where we get the disassociation, not being present, memory loss, frozen. On autopilot, often people will become distant. That just means something's happened and they can't handle it, and this is how their body kicks in. Or we can be hyper-aroused. which is our fight or flight. That's the anxiety, overwhelm, panic attacks, sometimes anger and aggression. And often this is where we get the addictions disorder, either overeating or using alcohol or drugs or sex or gambling, or it could be anything, but it's used to excess. It's helping us forget where we are and what's going on in our body. The good news is we can bring ourselves back into that window of control ourselves. That's where that helplessness kicks in for a lot of people with trauma. How many of you know what self-soothing is? Do you mind sharing what you do to self-soothe?
Sure. Deep breathing.
Exactly.
Yoga, grounding, mindfulness, being here now.
Perfect. Those are exactly the things. That's where we try to help people empower themselves. Remember, you don't realize you're helpless when you're traumatized. You're just trying to survive. You're still in that survival mode. When we empower people to learn self-soothing skills, it's all kinds of self-care. So, as you mentioned, I don't know your name, but thank you, Liz, mentioned being able to do deep breathing. That's the number one for those for whom it works. It's a slow breathing that helps to calm your central nervous system. Remember, when we get anxious or upset, our heart begins to race, our blood pressure rises, our muscles get cramped, we don't get oxygen to our brain or to our muscles, and deep breathing reverses all that, brings that blood pressure down, helps slow the heart rate, brings oxygen back into our life. They've done studies where they've watched the brain get overwhelmed, the limbic system's all lit up like fireworks are going off, and the prefrontal cortex, nothing's happening. They had them do a deep breathing exercise, and when they tested them again, the limbic system had begun to calm down, wasn't quite so active, and the prefrontal cortex was back online. That's why I tell my clients, don't try to have a conversation when you're upset. You won't even remember half the time what you said. But you can say some really hurtful things when you're upset. And the person who's next to you, who you're talking to, they won't forget those hurtful things. You won't remember them. They will. So don't try to have a conversation when your prefrontal cortex is not working. It's very destructive. So other things that we can do to help ourselves is in the form of self-care. So number one on my list is building a good social network. We're social creatures. We need people. And yes, if we've been traumatized, we're kind of scary not to have people hurt us again. But without a social network, you won't have the support you need. So it's hard, and I tell people to take it slowly. But building a social network, having hobbies, and exploring new ones. I can't tell you how many clients I have that will start something for the first time. I've had some that started doing artwork. They're like, wow, I didn't realize I could draw, or I didn't realize how much I was going to enjoy this. Some music. I had one person actually start doing music, and now he's got a degree in it. Never knew he even liked it. Explore, birding, crocheting, puzzles, hiking, anything outdoors. So remember that if you have childhood trauma, you were not getting the nurturing that you needed to develop yourself fully. You're just trying to survive. And so you have a lot of potential in you that never got realized. That self that should have been there if you felt loved and safe was trying to just protect itself. So you might even have goals and dreams that were shut down very early in life. Go back and try to recaptivate those. Trial and error. I know when I first became a therapist, I loved to be outside. I garden, I hike. It wasn't enough. And I go back to work on Monday, and I need to do something more. And so I said to my husband, I need a piano. He's like, what? I said, yeah, I need a piano. I need to be playing. So I've spent my whole life playing and singing, but at that time we didn't have a piano. I didn't have any way to play. Got a piano and it did the trick. And it won't always be the same thing. What might work for you for a while may not work for you later. So keep exploring. And if you have friends, then all the better. Let's try this. Let's try that. This is how we take care of ourselves. This is how we help ourselves gain self-confidence. If I pay attention to myself, then I'm telling myself I'm worth it. And there's no way anyone outside can do that for you. You have to do that yourself. Get outside in the sun. Unless, of course, you're allergic to the sun. But for most people, the sun is a healthy thing. Eat healthy and get enough sleep. Sleep is very important for our mental health. I don't know how much you realize this, but having had clients who have had psychotic breaks from lack of sleep, yeah, get your sleep. Everyone's needs are different, but sleep is very important for your mood. It's very important for you to be able to think straight. It's very important for you to have motivation. So sleep is a very important part of self-care. We're going to talk a little bit now about your inner child. So to talk about inner child, I'm going to talk about parts. We are composed of parts. We don't even think about it because if you're healthy, they're working flawlessly together. I like to give the example of you're going to cross a road. The part of you that has fear will say, look both ways, and you look both ways. That way you don't get hit by a car, right? And then the part of you that has common sense will say, okay, go on, and you cross that road. You don't give it a second thought. People with trauma, their parts get fragmented. Usually, some of the parts are so worried about you and want to protect you that they become very loud in your head. And in my experience dealing with trauma and people who struggle with trauma, fear is the number one that everyone has. So that fear would say, look both ways, you look both ways. And the common sense doesn't come in. It's not talking. It's not engaged. And the fear will say, are you sure you look both ways? Look again. Oh, I think you better look again. Maybe you better not cross that road. Can you see how that would disrupt the person's life if that fear voice is dominant in their head? So part of the parts of us is the inner child. Part of us we had that wants playfulness, that wants joy, wants innocence. We tend to lose that with childhood trauma. We tend to lose it as we get to be an adult. And so we have to be reconnected to that. That's the part that research has shown is the hardest part for people with trauma to deal with, the inner child. They want to go away. They want to shut up. One person told me she wanted to kill it. I said, don't do that. Don't do to her what was done to her whole entire life. Talk to her. Be kind to her. So I used to do a group for trauma, and this a couple years ago, and we did a group just on being playful as a way to get in touch with our inner child. And these are the different things that they came up with. I was so impressed with their list that I wrote them down. And you can see them from there, I hope. I especially love, like, walking in the rain. A couple years ago, my niece had just turned 18, and we were down visiting my sisters in the South. And it started to rain, a normal southern rainstorm, which is pretty heavy, but pretty warm. And she looked at me and said, let's go run in the rain. I thought, are you crazy? I'll get all wet. But she was so enthusiastic. I said, okay. So we went out, we jumped in that, we ran in the rain, put our heads up, got soaking wet, and we jumped in the puddles like we were little kids. And it brought back to me a memory that I had forgotten. When I was a little girl, maybe 4 or 5, going out in a rainstorm and standing underneath the eaves and getting soaking wet till my mom caught me. Those are the things we need to get back in touch with our inner selves. We don't want to lose that inner child. And when it's been hurt, it's usually crying. So you probably can think of more things, blowing bubbles, bonfires, hula hoop. Who's last time anyone did a hula hoop here?
I work with college students, so pretty recently.
Very good. Very good. Well, then do it with your children. blow bubbles with your kids, or play hide and seek with your kids, or skip rocks. I lived where we had a river going through our property, so skipping rocks is something I've always kept with, just because it puts me back in those days where I was so happy, innocent, and free, which we're not once we get to be an adult. Add to that list, okay? So, I wanted to add what I see in clients when they start to heal, and I think this is very important. Many people don't realize how wounded they are. When they come to me and begin to tell me their story and their struggle with life, and I tell you, there's some very successful people out there, you would not believe their story. Very heavy stories. I know they're beginning to heal when I hear these words, and I'm just going to read them out to you, and you can make of them whatever you will, okay? I didn't deserve the abuse. I don't need to rely on others to believe in me or love me because I'm learning to love myself. I give myself credit for the effort I have put into changing. It's okay to speak up and make my needs known. I will heal. These are powerful words because they don't believe any of this when they come in, especially that they will heal. That's the hardest part of being a trauma therapist. When the person, a good person, a successful person, is sitting in front of you and saying, I don't think I'll ever get better. I can't see things ever changing. It's a hard process. That's why when they say, I give myself credit, you need to. Trauma work is hard. Not everybody stays. Not everybody gets through it. And I had to let them go and know they're not ready yet. They have to be ready because it's a painful procedure. Who wants to go back over the past and remember things? That's why we don't. That's why we numb ourselves or forget our past. Those memories are painful. If we could just let them go, wouldn't that be wonderful? Maybe someday they'll find a pill or something that wipes that out of your brain. But right now, they don't know anything that does that. You can numb yourself with medication, but it doesn't take it away. It's that journey to the desert we have to make. Believing there's a promised land on the other side. So this is what I see in clients when they start to heal. And it's so exciting for me when people get to that point. It makes me so happy to see their hard work finally giving them a better life. They don't need to defend themselves anymore. We defend ourselves when we don't know ourselves, and we're trying to impress other people with who we are. But once we start healing, we begin to see that's not my problem. If I'm doing my best, and I know I'm doing my best, I don't need other people to affirm me or condemn me. It doesn't mean we're not open to criticism, but it's not the same thing. We don't live according to what others think of us. We are our authentic self. And that's really what I see with healing with trauma. We become our authentic self. Insights on what issues I need to work on. Now, when we come in with trauma, we're so hurt. We're afraid of the whole entire world. We're afraid of friends, family, sometimes even children, in that we don't want to hurt them. When we begin to heal, we can look at ourselves and realize, I even had a client recently say, I just realized that I'm abusive too. Well, when she would get angry, she would have outbursts of anger. And she realized, that's not okay. But you can't go there when you're hurting so much, you're just trying to survive. Remember, trauma has a cycle. And this is what many clients realize after they've started to heal. If they have childhood trauma, many times it's because their parents had childhood trauma. And their grandparents had childhood trauma. And their parents had childhood trauma. And because the brain only knows what it sees, it doesn't even know sometimes what love is supposed to look like. It doesn't know what acceptance is supposed to look like. And doesn't know what a good relationship is supposed to look like. You don't know what you don't know. So when they start to heal, and they begin to see what these things are, they're able to even look at themselves, and not with fear, but with strength that I can change some of these things. I don't have to be this way. And that's where they break the cycle. Able to accept myself as I am. This is huge. I think we all have to work at that to some extent, but especially if trauma is in the picture. The biggest negative belief that I see in people with trauma is, I'm not good enough. And everything that happens that doesn't fit their scheme reinforces that belief. Yeah, I guess God's mad at me. Why does everything bad have to happen to me? Well, it's not everything bad's happening to you. Your window of tolerance is very small. And so when we can accept ourselves for who we are, they'll say things like, oh, I messed that one up, but I learned from it. It was no big deal. Or this didn't go the way I had planned it, but oh well, we're moving on. It's not this overwhelming feeling of constant doom. The shoe's going to drop. I got to be ready. It's more peace. The ups and downs are less up and down. They're more of a regular, just normal life. Able to stay in the present. This is exciting. So many clients, when they process their traumas, stop getting triggered, which is what emotionally overwhelmed means. And they'll say, I had a client a long time ago say, he had been at a game in town, and he was gone out to get a drink, and when he got back in the elevator, he forgot to bring his ticket. And the guy said, you can't get in this elevator without your ticket. And he said, normally that would have made him absolutely outrageous, angry. Why is everybody always putting me down? Why don't people believe in me? And he had done his work. He said, oh, you're doing your job. Let me just call the friend I was with and have them bring the ticket out. Totally different. He was in the here and now. The guy wasn't his enemy. The guy was just doing his job. I hear this over and over and over again. When we don't get triggered, life begins to be a little bit easier for us. I actually had a client recently say that she started experiencing something that was strange to her, and she didn't know what it was at first. And then she realized it was joy. She didn't even know she didn't have joy. She didn't even know she was constantly in this state of anxiety. And she started to cry. Because all her life, she was in her 30s. All her life, she thought that was the way life was. Stress upon stress upon stress. Anxiety, things going wrong. Having to be careful. No. There is joy. Did I remember to move this? Yeah. Able to find good memories. That probably sounds strange. But some people with intense childhood trauma cannot think of anything but the bad. When they start to heal, they'll start remembering, well, it wasn't all bad. There were this good thing and that good thing. And that helps to see the bigger picture. And that's when they begin to realize, oh, my parents were doing the best they could. They had bad parents. They had trauma from their own parents. And that's why they didn't handle things very well. And I was the victim. It wasn't personal. It doesn't mean it was right. It's still wrong. I still didn't deserve to be abused. But it's not personal. It was them not able to handle life itself. And then being able to move through anger and resentment. There's a lot of anger that comes with trauma. Usually it's hidden. I have individuals who come And they're not angry with their parents. They'll even say, I had really good parents. They did the best they could. But they're depressed. And depression is anger turned inward. And the day they come and sit in front of me and say, oh, I'm really angry right now, I'm like, finally we're making some progress. But you don't want to stay in that anger. You want to work through it. So when they work through that anger, work through the resentment, that's a sign of healing that I see. And the last one is to be able to make mistakes without recrimination. We don't have to be perfect. We can only be the best that we are. Believe that the best that you are is all that you need to be. You can't believe that if you're wounded. You have to have healing to believe God only expects me to do the best I can. So the next one is on emotions. How many of you know Brené Brown? So she has a new book out. Have any of you read her new book, Atlas of the Heart? She says in there that most people only know 4 emotions: happiness, sadness, fear, and anger. How can you deal with your emotions if you don't know what they are? And how can you teach your children what their emotions are if you don't know what they are? So there's a lot of emotions up there. It's not exhaustive, but learn to identify your emotions. If you learn to identify your emotions, then you'll know what to do about them. And especially learn to identify the good emotions so that you can enjoy them more. People with trauma are afraid to enjoy good emotions because that means they're not on alert. They're not keeping themselves safe. And that means they don't enjoy the moment. It's also important to become comfortable being uncomfortable, because that's life. I think I have that in another slide, but I want to bring that in here. There are so many things in life that are not comfortable. And I have many, many, many clients who won't go there because it means they'll be uncomfortable. Well, are any of you in sports? Any of you done any kind of work that required some kind of training? Wasn't it uncomfortable to get trained? I know in sports, you get sore. You get exhausted. You make mistakes. You don't always shoot that ball right or hit that ball right or whatever sport you're in. If you give up, you'll never be anything, right? So in life, we have to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And that takes a lot of self-confidence that I can handle this. It's not more than I can handle. Probably all of you have handled things that are really, really bad. And yet when something goes wrong, the car won't start in the morning. Oh my God, it's the end of the world. Not really. You can handle it. The coffee maker stops working. I cannot live without my coffee. We can handle it. We get overwhelmed easily. So here's a short list of things to help you when you get overwhelmed. Remember, this is how you get empowered. I don't have to just be overwhelmed. And I've had clients who give me that SOS, can I see you immediately? Something happened. It's like, no, I don't have openings right now, or it's the weekend. Use your tools. What are your tools? And I'll always ask them when I do see them, okay, what tool did they survive? They always survive. Yeah, I'm okay now. What tools did you use? Oh, well, I used my deep breathing and I went outside for a walk. And so here are some tools to help you when you feel overwhelmed. Number 1, if you go to therapy, and I encourage anyone who recognizes they have any kind of trauma from their past, find a trauma therapist. Not any therapist, a trauma therapist. They will help you understand a lot of these things, knowing what is a trigger, so that when you get overwhelmed, you know what to do about it, instead of just shutting down or running away or getting angry. Learn to know what a trigger is, because then you can know what to do about it. What do you do about it? You learn self-soothing techniques. That's how you help yourself bring yourself down. That's that window of tolerance we talked about earlier. When you're overwhelmed, learn what to do about it. Don't bottle up strong feelings. How many of you have a hard time speaking up? So what happens is they get bottled up. And then what happens? It comes out when you can't hold it in anymore, and it's usually not very pleasant. I know, I'm guilty too. So learning not to bottle up your feelings. When you do speak, use I statements. This is where you don't blame other people for your issues. You take responsibility yourself. Walk away when angry or upset. And for couples, I always encourage them, have a talk beforehand. Because some people get really angry. Don't you dare walk away from me when I'm talking to you like that. No, that's not a good time to have a talk, because you're not talking, you're shouting at each other. Have a plan beforehand. When I get overwhelmed, I need to calm myself. So I'm going to say the word cucumber. And that means leave me alone. Let me go for a walk or for a drive or something else until I can calm down. When I'm calmed down, then we'll have a conversation. Avoid making assumptions about others. This is really a cause of a lot of stress and anxiety. We make assumptions instead of asking the person, wow, that sounded like you didn't like what I said. Did you really mean that? Or did I misunderstand? How many people have anxiety because of assumptions? A lot. Take a time out. Self-care means giving yourself attention, giving yourself that caring for you that no one else is going to give you. A lot of us wanted our parents to do it. If we didn't have parents who did it, we wait for someone to come rescue us. It's not going to happen. You have to be the one to take care of yourself. And becoming comfortable being uncomfortable. We spoke about that earlier, but that's a big one. Are there any questions about what we've talked about? These are extras. You have them in your handout. For those of you who have a hard time saying no, there's different ways to do it. So I put it in a handout. I had a hard time saying no, and I had to learn that it wasn't helping me to just always say yes. I didn't want to hurt the person's feelings. I thought I'd lose the friendship. And when I learned to say, she asked me I used to go to her house all the time. It was an hour away in the mountains, very nice. Well, I finally learned, I was working a full-time job and 2 part-time jobs because I just bought a house. And she asked me, come on up, we'll do meditation, we'll have a nice dinner, and we'll really be able to enjoy the evening. And I'm like, I am so tired, and I have to work, because I used to sing and play at a church that at that time. I said, I just can't do it. So instead of telling her I can't do it and fearing her anger or her upset, I said, I have other plans tonight, this weekend, so I'm not going to be able to come. And the other plan was, I needed a break. She's still my friend. She didn't dump me, but it really, really hard for me to learn how to say no. The other handout, not taking things personally. We all tend to do that. It's a matter of maturing emotionally to learn to see the bigger picture. These are different. Useful. And then enabling. And since we're talking about kids next week and trauma, this is hard. Okay? It wouldn't be worthwhile if it wasn't hard, right? So that is pretty much what I wanted to say to you all. Are there any questions, any comments, anything anyone would like to add? A story, a thought, question? Feel free.
So, I was looking at the list like on
Yes.
free. Thank you. I froze. I couldn't come up with it. But a lot of those things, I'm like, sometimes this, sometimes that, and I have anxiety. Like, is there kind of a continuum where it doesn't necessarily mean
Well, usually those responses are not healthy responses. So whether it's trauma-based or not, again, you can have some of these things without having trauma, but you won't have, if you have trauma, you will have this problem. So the ideal is to learn the healthy response. A lot of that means learning how to self-regulate. We don't teach self-regulation. I wish they taught it in schools. Because who of us can survive as an adult without self-regulation? But where have you heard that word before, unless you've been to trauma and some kind of therapy? It's not banded around like other things are. So self-regulation, and that's why the self-soothing skills are so very important. I sometimes get people who have been in trauma, who have been in therapy for years. And so when they come to me, they know all these different skills. So they're really easy to work with. We just do EMDR. But if you haven't been to therapy, you don't know. Boundaries. How many of you know about boundaries? You obviously know a lot, don't you?
I'm getting my master's in mental health.
Oh, yes.
I'm doing my internship right
Oh, great.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Wonderful. So boundaries are another important part of being a mature and a responsible adult. Not making assumptions. I did a workshop a long time ago, it was several years ago, to a community in the South about emotional maturity. We don't think about emotional maturity, do we? Emotional maturity is not making assumptions about things, asking, being able to see the bigger picture, stepping back and realizing, okay, I make an interpretation because you just shut that door really loud and that must mean you're mad at me. Well, emotional maturity would say, well, there's other reasons. Maybe that person slipped out of their hand. Maybe that person's in a hurry. So we make these assumptions without even thinking about other interpretations. Part of growth. Emotional growth and mental health growth is the rest of your life. We don't accomplish it. We just keep working at it. And if we don't work at it, we don't grow. It's that simple. Any other questions? Any other comments? Well, thank you very much. I really appreciated you being here. I really enjoyed sharing these concepts with you. And I hope it helps.